Welcome to this Peace Week session on psychological first aid for emerging practitioners. This event is being hosted by the Mary Hoch Center for Reconciliation at the Carter School. I'll put a link to that in the chat if you would like to learn more. My name is Deborah Sacher. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Associate Director of the Mary Hoch Center for Reconciliation, or MHCR. I'm pleased to introduce my colleagues at MHCR who will be guiding you through today's interactive program on well-being, self-care, and resilience in the conflict resolution field. While she's not on your screen, in today's program, you will be hearing about MHCR Insider Reconciler Fellow, Rowda Olad, who is a psychotherapist and the founder of Mandeeq Mental Health Without Borders in Somalia. On your screen, you will see the director of MHCR, Antti Pentikainen, through his work with the United States Institute for Peace, the United Nations, and FinChurch Aid, to name a few. Antti holds extensive experience in peace processes and reconciliation. His efforts now focus on developing support mechanisms to connect insider reconcilers with state-level political processes. Working with Antti, we have Hannah Adamson. Hannah is a master's student at the Carter School and the Transformation and Reconciliation Lab Manager at the Mary Hoch Center for Reconciliation. Outside of George Mason, Hannah also works with the Think Peace Learning and Support Hub as the Program Manager of the Peace and Trust Horn of Africa Project. Also on your screen, you'll find Nicholas Sherwood. Nick is a PhD candidate and a graduate instructor at the Carter School, as well as the well-being expert of the Parachute People, which is a nonprofit organization that you'll hear more about shortly. And finally, certainly last but not least, is the host of this event, my colleague, Marisa Maddox. Marisa is a master's student at the Carter School and the development manager, focusing on impact, development, and administration at MHCR. Marisa will be leading us through today's program, and I'll remain attentive to the chat with any questions that come up throughout the session. So please feel free to ask your questions at any time. And there'll also be a dedicated Q&A time at the end of today's presentation as well. Marisa, over to you.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I'm so excited to get started today. I just want to start with a statement that well-being has been in MHCR's mission and vision and our team and organizational culture for, I guess, since its advent, even though I've only experienced that for a little over 2 years. And I'm really excited to be able to give an unofficial but a bit of a workshop and training on how to take care of ourselves through not only hearing about practitioners and students currently working to take care of themselves while doing this work, and also through building our own little resource list that we can go back to at the end. So first, unfortunately, our Insider Reconciler fellow, Rowda Olad, was not able to join us today, and her plate has filled up very quickly as she is really a really prolific and important peace builder in Somalia. Rowda is one of only a couple of psychotherapists that work in Somalia. She does a lot of trauma healing work. She is also the director of Mandeeq Mental Health that works in Somalia, where she operates in that role. Antti may also correct me on any of these things when he gets to his points. But one thing I wanted to cover a bit of today is one of the things Rowda does is a lot of psychoeducation. And she was just recently in a panel this morning where she did a session talking about the different hats that we all wear. And I think that was very fitting for this event as well, if she would have been able to join. So I'm describing it. So basically, she was describing that we each wear different hats in our lives. We're the hat of child, parent, professional in whatever way, student and person going about our lives, but we often forget to wear the things that we've experienced as a hat for long enough to feel and acknowledge them, and treat those things. So for her work with doing trainings and peer exchanges with other peace builders, she asks them to write the traumas that they've experienced in their communities on a piece of paper, and then to tape other pieces of paper around and wear that as a hat, as they think about what they can do to address those traumas and experiences in their own community. She talked about how that makes these peace builders feel, and where they think they should prioritize addressing those in their own communities. Also, thank you to Hannah. She put in the chat, Rowda has been featured in Vogue as the amazing woman she is, and you can learn more about her at that link. So feel free to look more at that link. Also, when you visit MHCR's website, she has a couple featured stories, including in our annual report. And please look forward to an event that should host Rowda in the coming months as she's coming to the States. It means the close time zone will be much easier to facilitate with her. She has promised me that she will be at 1 when she's in the States. So now I will move to our director, Antti Pentikainen, who has been given a great introduction by Deborah. And I just want to ask a bit about your experience taking care of your mental health in all of your different roles as you've been in practice.
Well, thank you, Marissa. And I think this is my first chance to welcome Deborah outside our team. So Deborah, we're really excited that you joined Carter School and that you bring all the experience, including the Columbia mediation training. And so thank you for joining us and thank you for being with us. And I think all of you who are in this call, you will have some insights on what MHCR is and strives to be. And if that triggers curiosity or interest to join our team, do email Deborah so we can start a conversation. There are some other speakers here, will reveal what they have done. But Marissa, thank you for your question. I just as a background, I want to say that before I came to join Carter School, I was leading an organization about the size of USIP, a bit more staff than USIP, and I look backwards now and I realize that I did not understand the concept of trauma and now how it's affecting organizations that work in humanitarian situations and peace building situations and the effects of career trauma. I think some of you might have experienced or will experience once you join these organizations that they're not good at talking how it's affecting them. And we see a lot of behavior in organizations that's not constructive or supportive. And without having the language around it, it's really hard to address those underlying issues. So as a future or current peace builders and peace mediators and people working in these, do make your way to the HR and to the leadership and say that we have to expand our understanding on the trauma because that is affecting who we are, how good we are, and how we relate to each other, and what is the organization's culture. And if we don't, it's going to come and hurt us, and the organization is paying a price for it. So, but without jumping into my experiences, I actually would love to share a little bit what Stella Sabiti shared in this amazing event, actually, that Marissa was also helping me to co-facilitate. She gave me permission, and Stella has shared her story. I won't go into details, but she was abducted at a very young age and faced a lot of different forms of abuse, and coincidentally ended up 15 years later being the mediator towards that same armed group to try to bring them out of jungle into a peace process. And you can just imagine the amount of mental process that requires. And so what Stella said is that a couple of things. First of all, it's good to know that I'm not the only one. I'm not the only survivor. There are others. Second, I believe in the goodness of every human being, and that helps me to discover the humanity on the other, which is her key of being able to act as a peace mediator against the very group that was hurting her. And then when we did the trauma hat, she said, well, I didn't write the trauma. I wrote hope, forgiveness, and understanding, that I wanted to move in my brains outside the barriers of trauma. Like it feels already so natural to me. And so she had done that homework, had been on that healing journey to not be driven or directed or limited, contained by trauma, but with whatever has made her get through. And by being liberated from it, it has made her able to act. And finally, she spoke about dancing. Like no matter what the situation is, no matter how hard it is, if bullets are flying, she goes back to dancing. And so we all should have this some kind of physical way of processing what's in our mind. And yeah, those were something that she shared, and I thought they were much more insightful than my experiences. Back to you, Marissa.
That's beautiful, Antti. It's always great to hear from insiders in their own community, and working there as one of our other tenants at MHCR. I want to ask you about a couple of things that I know you've shared before. You've been in certain contexts of conflict that have been very active with violence and different situations that are there. And on the likelihood that some of us, at least in this call, might be in those contexts someday, I want to ask a couple of questions about how you protected your mental health during those. So first, thinking of a time that was stressful while you're in the field, what was your first instinct to protect your mental health? And then on the second coin of that, what activities did you incorporate in your daily life that recentered you?
Well, I'll maybe share this through a story. So there is a moment in 2012 in Somalia where I had been involved for about 5 years of trying to mediate the underlying conflict to make Somalia to the stage where presidential elections were happening. So obviously, we had to be there to help to master any hurdles and difficulties that were coming. And among the few foreigners staying were me and Peter Krester from Al Jazeera, who later on was imprisoned in Egypt during the Tahrir Square demonstrations, if you remember that. And so there's a day when I had been in the city there. We had nearly been shot at the checkpoint, and there was a lot of violence going on in the city. And once we made to the safe house that we were sharing with Peter, he kind of saw from my face that it had been a hard day, and he immediately walked to this huge Italian coffee machine that the safe house had. And so the tradition was that somebody makes you this incredibly tasty espresso, and then he pointed out me to this sun like chair and this fake palm beside the chair where you could just lean back, and then he brought me the coffee, and just the taste of that incredible coffee and being under that fake palm and just thinking that you're not there made the mind relax. But the routines in the evenings were, because of course you could see the sound of gunfire and explosives going on off. You had to liberate your mind. And a couple of things we did, you had to wash your clothes because you needed the next day. But the second was, there's one isolated room in the middle of the building with the running mat. And so we had our 15, 20 minutes on it. And usually we listened to music, so you could totally get out of your mind of the place. And then were the dinners, where there was mostly cracking jokes. So kind of this kind of practical things of just being able to move forward. There were a couple of things, Marissa. Back to you.
Thanks, Antti. Yeah, I think it's great to remember the little sensations that can recenter your body, even in very stressful situations. Looking back again on what you may have been able to do when those stressful situations were becoming high stressed, what were some signs for you that your mental health was being affected? Where did you see ways that you needed to maybe slow down and recenter?
Well, I wish I would have understood, or having been able to slow down and recenter. The challenge of leading an organization was that you necessarily didn't understand that if any of your staff came with the similar symptoms, you forced them to go to see doctor and a therapist and attend peer groups and do whatever was needed. But then for yourself, there was the next challenge that you had to make. I could see my sleep deteriorating, starting maybe sometime 2006, and it became a really kind of chronic insomnia, and I'm still working to recover from that. But I've kind of been able to balance my life that I can live with what it is without becoming stressed from it. Something that I learned, and I don't know if this is helpful, but I only discovered this afterwards, and that's why I try to speak openly about it, is kind of how sensitive minds works. And so I learned afterwards that the way my mind functions may be like close to what we call highly sensitive people, which comes with the some traits. One is that you feel what's in the room, like what's in between people, and then it becomes like a challenge to understand, okay, what's the problem? And if you understand the problem, then it comes like an ethical urge to do something about it, and then you push yourself in that wheel and cycle. And I only discovered this fairly late, and I wish I would have understood it better, because that would have made me able to create some boundaries for myself, but also the organization I was leading, because this also created urge for the organization to be available and to push itself, often too heavily and too broad. So I think learning who you are and how you function and it's really significant.
Great, Antti, thank you. I guess my last question before, if you have any wider insight that you still would want to share, is what have you done or seen your colleagues do to protect their mental health throughout time in the field? Are there large lessons that you've learned from watching others take care of themselves that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I would just like to make an observation kind of through the comment of colleagues in field, that often in organizations, we set up systems for our expats and ourselves that include you're in the hardship place for a certain period of weeks, and then you have to have RTR. If there's an incident or situation, you're evacuated, you're put on a safe place. But these don't apply to our local colleagues. And I think the challenge and the route to, demand for us is to look for our local partners, our friends who are actually the leaders in the process, and not to be distracted that it's just us. And it's a little bit of a luxury to speak about those kind of things. But I just want to quote another friend from this morning, Abdi Salam, with whom I worked 2 years in Somalia. He's led about 50 local reconciliation process, and I was involved in many of them. And he said that, well, self-care, checking emotional level, recognizing our own agency, so seeing how we can act and getting balanced with that. Sometimes something that gives you passion, so staying focused on where you really get the passion. He mentioned about several friends and colleagues we've lost who were killed, and how he said that hurts, but it also gives power to continue, which speaks to the incredible challenge that these insiders are in. And finally, if you believe in what you do, that to be good, that kind of gives you a lot of inner strength and healing throughout the process. So this was something that he shared, and I just want to honor people who cannot be taken out of situations and on RR or evacuated.
Thank you. Thank you for your reflections and bringing in voices of others who are also doing such important work in their own communities in active conflict contexts. The next speaker that I'll be moving on to is another, I didn't acknowledge this with Antti, but another one of my most important mentors since I've been at the Carter School, and those that I've learned from here. Both Antti and Nick Sherwood have taught me pretty much everything I know since joining MHCR. And Nick, now being a graduate lecturer and being a PhD with all but dissertation and thick in writing mode, is going to talk about burnout and what that is and preventing burnout.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to talk to you all about burnout, but I'm going to be a very, very bad model of what to do, because like Marisa said, I am thick in the thicket of dissertation writing. Don't push it off to the last minute, y'all. Theses and dissertations, knock it out a piece by piece, but hey, it is what it is. So I'm calling in wiped and exhausted from DC, and it's a pleasure to see so many people on this call. So yeah, like Marisa said, I'm a graduate lecturer at the Carter School. I've been in the PhD program since fall of 19, and I'm seeing a few familiar faces here that I think y'all have come to some of our other MHCR's Peace Week events throughout the years. So it's a pleasure to see you back. The topics I'm going to get into is based off of a few different professional experiences that I've had. Number one is the dissertation that I'm writing, which focuses on resilience building in peace builders operating in active conflict contexts. I've been really interested in clinical health and counseling psychology for many, many years. And so that's kind of my specialized research area. I'm also, as Marisa said, the well-being expert of the parachute people. I think we've got someone with their mic on. Like Marisa said, I'm the well-being expert of the parachute people. Several years ago, some close friends and I founded the organization. So I was on the board of directors for a few years. We started to see folks kind of in my age range, millennials, some 31, so think 31 plus or minus a few years, who were in the music industry, in service industry, and if you want to call arts and hospitality and service careers, who did not have strong mental health or well-being practices. And so over the course of several years, we founded the nonprofit and started bringing mental health promotion programming to music festivals and live music events throughout the United States. What I did with Parachute People was mostly facilitate workshops and panels. The photo in front of you was taken at this summer's Bonner. So it was June of 2023. Bonner is one of the largest music festivals in the US. Happens in Manchester, Tennessee every year. You can see me. Oh, I'm actually wearing the exact same shirt. That's great. So all the way here on the right-hand side with those funky socks and the thunder thighs and the shorts and the shirt. Yeah, there we go. On the right-hand side, that's me. On the left-hand side with the green clipboard is Sydney Hurst, who's on the board of directors and is a close friend and colleague of mine. The folks in the middle are from a bunch of different industries, all within the caring professions. What are the caring professions? Caring professions refer to vocations where you are typically serving humans in some way. You're promoting human welfare. You're often working with vulnerable, underserved, and marginalized populations. Mental health counselors, caring professions, social workers, I would say peace builders, conflict resolution practitioners, depending on kind of, where you are in the field, you're probably going to be more or less caring profession facing. I'm quick to add, folks in the caring professions might or might not be interfacing directly with the populations that they're serving. I think that's really important to keep in mind, that you don't need to be, in the peace building field. It doesn't matter if you're in the field, right, in the conflict zone doing humanitarian work or service provision. You can also be a grant writer or an administrative assistant or a researcher and still experience some of the challenges that face the folks in the caring professions. Caring professionals, and this is based off of the academic literature and the topics that we discussed in that panel that Marisa showed you the photo from. Folks in the caring professions typically rate higher in agreeableness, conscientiousness. They're typically more extroverted. Conversely, they're also typically rate higher on emotional instability. So these are people who feel very much lead. Their work makes them feel a lot. And that's probably one reason they self-selected to go into a field that allows them to express themselves emotionally. Caring professionals have also been found to experience lower self-image at different times, especially if they've perceived their work as not being effective or not working. There have been reports of chronic feelings of emptiness unless they're able to engage in their mission or in their work. They have a fear of abandonment and isolation, and they're prone to very intense relationships. Caring professionals are at higher risk, who are at higher risk, have a heavier workload. There's a high amount of time pressure in the work that they do. They have less what's called autonomy of thought. So think about if you've had a micromanager that have told you, you will do work, this, and this. Micromanaging negatively impacts our sense of freedom in the workplace. And when we don't feel free to work the way that we want to work, that typically predicts higher rates of mental illness. So all of these things kind of put together, their personality, the industry that they're in, and workplace stressors can kind of create a crucible of burnout. I would imagine, I'm just kind of shooting in the dark, most people on this call have experienced burnout. Most people in our profession have. What burnout is in the scholarly literature, which again, we're putting, kind of surface level words to a very deep experience. Burnout is mental fatigue and exhaustion. So there's kind of 4 legs to burnout: mental fatigue and exhaustion. You feel negatively about your colleagues, your coworkers, and eventually the populations that you're serving. Depersonalization, which if you're experiencing burnout, it sometimes feels like you're on autopilot, that you're not the one driving the car of your body. That's what depersonalization is. And then finally, low feelings of self-accomplishment, this feeling that I'm showing up every day to work and it feels like I'm getting nothing done, and that nothing that I am getting done actually matters. Burnout is correlated with anxiety and depression, like I mentioned earlier, fatigue and exhaustion, lower morale in the workplace, reduced efficiency and performance, and difficulty with relationships, both in the office and then when you take your work home with you. That can also make it difficult to deal with at home. Some of the panel that I did at Bonner this summer, we looked at preventative care. So rather than when someone is burning out and how do we help them get out of it, rather bake practices into the workplace and into your home life that can prevent it. The old adage in biomedical and health sciences is that it's a 3-to-1 investment. For every $3 you spend on treatment, you spend $1 on prevention. So there's a tremendous cost benefit analysis to kind of getting ahead of the curve here. So yeah, what are some of the ways that we can prevent burnout? On the work front, like I mentioned earlier, reduce micromanagement. And I know that sometimes when when we're on a very heavy deadline and the stakes are really high, and I have served as a manager in many capacities, and I've had to fight this within myself. It's not appropriate for me to tell my direct reports exactly how to do their job. I have to assume they know what they're doing. And I think it makes sense. There's high stakes. You want to control everything. You really have to keep that in check. So reducing micromanagement, engaging in a mindfulness practice. Mindfulness doesn't necessarily mean you're going to sit at your desk and meditate. Going for a walk at lunch. I remember during kind of the thick of pandemic days, on MHCR team calls, we would send pictures of how we're walking around, getting out in nature. I think that was a big thing in early pandemic. The empirical literature is quite clear. Getting out of your workspace, even for a few minutes every day, does allow a reset. It helps you remember my life isn't the office. Build strong social support networks. So having a mentor is really, really important. I'm glad, Marisa, first off, thank you for the kind words about the mentorship model that we have at MHCR. Having someone that has been in the field longer than you and has faced similar challenges as you, having that type of role model mentor relationship that can say, kind of like Antti did, I had an experience where I told my colleagues that they needed to go see a counselor, but I myself didn't, right? Having someone who is honest about the challenges that they faced and honest about how they've navigated them successfully and unsuccessfully, that's super, super important for preventing burnout. Getting frequent feedback on your workplace performance. If you go long periods of time without getting feedback, and then you get kind of a negative review, I was working so hard for so long. Why didn't you think I'm doing a good job? Well, it's because you didn't have regular feedback intervals. At home, reduce aftercare responsibilities as much as possible. This is obviously super tough for caretakers. And, we're experiencing a caretaking crisis right now of my parents' generation taking care of their parents and the generation below them. So caretakers, this is going to be super tough. Reduce homework conflict. So don't bring your work home with you. Trust in your friends and family and say, I'm having a really tough time. I think I might be on the burnout train, etc. We've covered workplace prevention measures, home prevention measures, and now what can you yourself do? Build physical and mental health and well-being practices, workout, regular, enough sufficient sleep, healthy nutrition plan, go on vacations if able, enjoy your various hobbies. I'm obviously a music guy, so I need to be going to a concert, ideally, every week. That's not going to happen, but every couple months or so, get to a show, right? Another big one that I think is going to be difficult for our current world, I'm going to wrap up my section here with this. Screen time, these little dopamine doses, our phones and computers. Too much screen time is significantly positively correlated with burnout. So make sure when you are engaging in respite, you're walking away from all of the little screens and buttons and stuff. I know I just flew through all of that. I'll drop my name and email in the chat if you want to pick up this conversation and get a little bit further into it. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. And I'm also happy to answer any questions about the parachute people as well. Marisa, over to you.
Thanks, Nick. No, it's always great to hear from who we joke is our joke and not really joke that you're our resident well-being expert, and really excited to see how that plays out in your dissertation as well. Nick also touched on a few of the preventative measures that we'll go through when we do our little workshop. So if any of those resonated with you, keep them in the back of your mind. Now, I think one of the biggest things that I have put value in as my time in the Carter School is learning from other students. So I wanted to bring on one of my peers and great colleagues who's also taught me a lot, and also hopefully closer to the experience being still in coursework. So Hannah Adamson, our great programs officer and now lab manager, is going to come and talk about self-care and what that means to her, and how she has dealt with that. So welcome, Hannah.
Thanks, Marisa. And it's just so great to be on the panel today with everybody, to hear from Antti's many years of experience and now framed with Nick's explanation of burnout and the expertise he has in this area. So I hope I can kind of connect the dots as to what this means for students and people coming into the field. So happy to have this conversation, Marisa.
Great, thank you. My first big question, of course, seems simple but can be very nuanced, is how do you define self-care?
Great. I do think that can be a loaded question, but I have what works for me. And I think that's going to be a theme throughout this kind of conversation, is that this is not universal. So for me, self-care is a mindful awareness and choice to take action to fulfill my needs. So this can take a few different forms: my physical needs, getting enough sleep, eating healthy, my social needs and connective needs, how I connect with peers and colleagues, financial needs, taking time to organize what's going on, as well as school, being a student, staying on top of assignments, and then connecting to a deeper purpose. And for me, spirituality. I think that looks different for every person, but connecting to something bigger than myself. So for me, self-care is not just a bubble bath. It's recognizing when things aren't working and taking the steps to address them. So that might be a more like restorative practice, but then also, as Nick was talking about earlier, a lot of it is preventative. And I think when we're talking about self-care, I'd like to focus on the preventative part. So what are we doing to make ourselves more resilient, and strengthen ourselves for when we're inevitably hit with the different challenges that come up?
Right. Yeah, I think the preventative model really aligns with what we're trying to do here and really equip ourselves, because hopefully we're not thinking about the inevitability of having something hard happen and treating ourselves then, but thinking about that life will get hard, and how do we take care of ourselves now so that we can get through those things in a smoother way. We all know that being in school and working at the same time means that there are especially certain times of year that are high stress, and different life events come up. So the next question is, when have you struggled with your self-care routine? And I hope you don't mind me throwing in a follow-up is, how have you dealt with that struggle and still implementing those self-care aspects?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this is something that a lot of students deal with, is juggling many responsibilities, whether that looks like just schoolwork, managing different classes, managing 1, 2, sometimes I've heard 3 jobs, as well as school, as well as family and social responsibilities. These are a lot of things going on. And sometimes I think we talk about how like university years, even grad student years, are meant to be free and fun, but they also come with a lot of stressors. So I think it's important that we pay attention to those too. So kind of speaking on that, I think the times that I have struggled the most are when I'm busy in a lot of those different spheres of my life. So whenever school is busy and I have a lot going on socially, or when I'm busy at school and I'm questioning things about my deeper purpose or how I connect to others, things like that. So I'd say during these busy seasons, that's when the preventative care maybe doesn't have the attention paid to it. And so whenever I stop kind of tuning up for my preventative care, that's when I feel a little bit depleted and more susceptible to feeling things like burnout that Nick was describing. So I think what I've realized, not that I've anywhere near perfected it, is that I need a buffer. So I think something I've talked a lot about with peers, especially in the past couple of months, is that giving 100% needs to look a little bit different. So 100% doesn't necessarily mean you're giving 100% of yourself to your school, to your work, to your family, to your friends, to everything outside of yourself. Some of your percent has to go to taking care of you. You need that buffer. So changing what capacity in a full plate looks like. So my full plate might look like giving 90% to everything else and having 10% for myself. So I think like reframing it for myself to teach myself that that's not selfish, that that's actually just maintaining what I need to be able to give my fullest in that other 90% of my life. So I think building in that self-care routine within that 10% is how I've gotten through that. So for me, that means having a schedule. I'm a little bit tied to my calendar. If it's not on the calendar, it does not exist, for better or worse. So building in the self-care, putting it on the calendar. I'm glad to see in the chat that's resonating for some of you guys too. So for me, I like to do the Latin dance club here at Mason, and I use the free yoga classes we have going on. So I put those on my calendar and make sure that I go to them, holding that accountability to myself. And at the same time, granting myself the flexibility to change. There might be a week where I'm like, okay, as much as I do need to keep up with taking that time for myself, I have this paper due. I'll feel better if I take the time now and do the paper, and maybe I'll do a YouTube yoga later in the week. So making sure that your plan can be adjusted to meet your changing needs. And I think that's one of the reasons why self-care is tricky, but kind of being aware that you might need to change and that set routine will need to adapt as well.
Thanks. Yeah, I think one of the biggest points I took from what you said is that flexibility is important. I think that resonates both with the amount of yourself you give and also with that routine, and being flexible to your own needs changing at a time, not feeling guilty when things pile up. And that is so important, I think, especially for those of us in the caring professions and the peace building field, where our brains are used to prioritizing the work, and prioritizing those needs instead of ourselves. So the next question I want to ask, as we're getting a little bit close on time, is what have you done or seen your peers do? Same question as Antti, for maintaining your self-care routine. What lessons have you gleaned? What's your biggest takeaway that you want to share?
Oh goodness, so there's a lot I think I could say here, so I'm gonna have to narrow it down. I've learned a lot from my peers, and I've also learned from what hasn't worked for me in the past. So I think I spoke already about time management and keeping a schedule. I think something else that's important is taking time to feel whatever emotions are coming up in what's challenging in your life at that moment. So if you're feeling sad, if you're feeling worried, if you're feeling tired, instead of thinking, oh, I need to be doing this instead, or I need to shift, take time, take a second to feel that and let it come through you in a healthy way, and then readjust and meet that need and go back to what you're doing. Because by taking the time to address it, you'll actually spend less time dealing with the consequences of whatever that emotion is. And then I'd like to just share like a few things, other things I've learned from peers. Taking time at the beginning or end of the week to reflect or set intentions for your self-care plan, having boundaries, saying no, it's not a crime. That's something that I have to remind myself. Trying out new things. I forget if it was Nick or Antti talked about leaning into the passion and what sets you on fire. So finding those things, leaning into those things so that you keep that spark and are avoiding burnout. Having conversations with each other about self-care. I think creating an awareness is important. Movement, paying attention to our senses, what's around us, how are we feeling, what's happening in our bodies. And then another thing, and I think this is especially apt for students, is the lovingly termed accountability buddy. So having people that you're accountable to. So if you have a shared goal with a friend, how can you both meet your study goal or your writing deadline? Say, we're going to sit down and work together for 3 hours, and then we can even chat about it, take a walk after, have a reward. So that's something that I've really appreciated. And then even thinking for students, like as we're going out into the professional fields, in interviews, you're often asked like, what questions do you have for us at the end of the interview? So I think something, especially for caring professions, that can be helpful is thinking about, well, how is well-being supported within your organization? Or how do you, as my potential supervisor, encourage your employees to have positive self-care? And I think this is speaking a little bit to how Antti was supporting that for his employees and now is very much cultivating that throughout our MHCR team. So just wanting to cultivate that within the field. So I know we're running short on time, so I'll just kind of leave with this, that there is no one right or wrong way to do self-care. It's not something any of us will ever achieve or be done with or check off a box. It's going to be putting in the work to know ourselves and to consistently work to meet and to tweak what we need to meet our needs. And this is something that I think we're not alone in. I mean, obviously, we're all sitting here on this call, so that is indicating some level of care. And I think going into these caring professions and going into peace building, we can work together, especially as, the title of this event, Emerging Practitioners, to kind of cultivate this awareness and this community of support going into the field, so that hopefully looking back and reflecting when we're 20 years down the line, that will recognize the ways that we have done well and what we can do better moving forward. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank you so much, Marisa, for the questions.
Thanks, Hannah. That was, I think it really resonated with how much I've learned over the last 4 years, doing all the student work and balancing. And I have also learned so much from you being close with how to manage that resilience in our time and the team together. So we're going to move to the workshop part that was oh so promised in the title of the event. So there's 2 ways you can engage with this. Is first, I'm gonna do a piece of paper because it helps me to physically write things down when I see it, and then I'll probably go put it the certain things in my calendar or in my priority list later. Or you can open a document and have either 2 sides or 2 pages for the different things. We're going to go first in what will help us in emergencies. This emergency is, I'm using in a very loose term, those times where self-care is really difficult, or those times where all of a sudden you're really down and out and need some support. And then we're going to go and spend some time on the preventative care side, thinking about what Nick and Hannah and Antti have all described as things that have helped their mental health going out throughout life. And then I will show a model that describes 4 different realms of psychological and mental health support that we can pick from those buckets and do. So first, I call them on my paper, emergency resources. The first thing that you're doing in psychological first aid that I've gleaned from other things is you have to stop, connect, and then collect. So the first is stopping and with enough time to know that something is wrong, and to slow down and maybe even have some time to regulate your nervous system and what you're feeling in your body, to know what is happening. This can look like walking out of a room in a really tense situation. It can look like taking time at the end of the day to sit by yourself and understand what happened that day. It can look like taking a weekend off and going to Point of View, or just outside and getting some different space. And of course, this is tailored to the Carter School students. So this will look different if you're coming from the practitioner side as you move into the field, or maybe even if you're calling in from around the world, it might look a tad different. But the second, to connect, to reach out to a trusted person. This can be someone you've already set up as your counselor, your therapist. This can be a trusted friend, a family member. It doesn't mean that you have to instantaneously share everything that's going on, but connecting and knowing you're not alone does a lot for your mental health and just understanding of safety in that moment. And the third, that is the part that we will all work on doing together, is collecting your resources. So we all have multiple different resources around the university first. So I have broken my resources down into first, university resources, second, federal, national resources, third, my county and city resources, and then fourth, community. If you want to break community down even faster, even further, 5 is family and friends. So the first is, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to go find the national mental health hotlines, national help hotlines. I can share them in the chat, but as we're all working on this together, hopefully we're all looking for those. And then to find your city resources. So I just recently moved to Alexandria, and I discovered that on their city website, they actually have a full list of our resources that we have. And then I will copy in from what I have that should be on all of our syllabi. So I hope you have seen it before, but the list of CAPS resources and resources we have at the university. Let's see if I can get that pulled up. And then if anybody wants to open their camera during the workshop or share in the chat what resource you're finding and where it has been, that would be great. For those of us doing it together, can you give like a thumbs up reaction when you have like some of your local resources together? In the group that's doing the workshop together.
Yeah, I did a search. I can post it.
Yeah, that'd be great. Or just
All
like,
right. All right. I'm just trying to get these things. Hold
No
on,
problem.
please. Okay. Let me see if I can do it. I copy it. So
Great. I'm gonna copy the university resources.
Okay.
Right.
You got it?
Yeah.
It's hard because some kind they lock me out. Okay. I am a recovery coach, and I study and practice, and I'm a ordained minister, so I have a lot of those days.
Yeah, I'm sure. All of those roles sound like a lot, and really have a need to prioritize all these things.
Yeah, this conversation has been very interesting. We also have to learn how to listen ourselves and our bodies.
Yes, definitely. One thing we definitely don't have time to get into on this, but the somatic experiencing of what your body is reacting to during those times is so important to get to know.
Okay.
So I'm gonna, if any of you is still working on that resource, that's fine. But I'm gonna move on just a little bit. The biggest part of these is the family and friends. So we already talked about connecting, reaching out to one person. But in these resources, having my goal is to have 5 people that I know I can reach out to. That way, if I know someone is also going through something very hard, I can reach out to someone that I'm more informed will have the capacity to help, and I'm not impacting their mental health at the same time. So I have my mom, and then I have 2 of my best friends. And then I do have a therapist at CAPS at Mason. I really do support CAPS, and I love my therapists that I've gotten through CAPS. And then I have another friend, but they're a different category in my mind because they're at home in Arizona instead of in person with me. So those who I can reach out to virtually and in person, depending on the need and the time. Okay. I'm hoping you all have your resources. Please message in the chat if you need more time. But we're going to go to preventative tools. So the biggest thing in preventative tools is knowing the different categories. So I'm going to share screen here to an adaptation of a wonderful little model that Nick actually taught in a 625 class in the last 2 weeks ago, I guess, when our session was. So this is the biopsychosocial spiritual model, and we're all going to go through these 4 buckets and pick out 2 to 3 things that you can pour into in your self-care routine, and add them to your list, which I'm calling your toolbox, and get to know which of these works for different times of feeling disconnected or in high stress. I'll give you a couple minutes to think and write. Another thing to note is some of these definitely overlap. The buckets don't have very clear boundaries. So if something to you is in one bucket and you think of it more in another way, that's also perfectly fine, and you can put it wherever you want in your list. Thanks, Deborah, for sharing that. I was going to say, if anybody wants to share in the chat which ones resonate big for you. Feel free if any of this is unclear to ask questions. Thanks, Hannah. Yeah, nature is really resonates with me. Thanks, Miriam. Yeah, movement and exercise. I really had to rethink what I think about movement and exercise and not putting it into this hour-long workout plan that I have to do, but more prioritizing moving in ways that work with my routine and how my body is feeling. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, nutrition. While you all are finishing, I thought that I would share my list. For biological, it definitely is sleep and I'd say stress levels. I've been able to calm my bodily stress levels with meditation, which is also, of course, part of the others. Psychological, one of the big things for me is the education as well as my hobbies. My hobby also goes into biological movement. I play underwater rugby, which is a very weird sport, but if anybody wants to talk about that, I'm always down. And Mason has an underwater hockey team, so if anybody needs a low impact swimming sport but hates slaps, let me know. And sociocultural, I am always looking forward to time with my friends, and then going into the community support of different groups that I'm a part of at Mason. Spiritual, definitely thinking of my connection to nature, as well as my faith community and what that looks like for me, even though that's changed over time. Yeah, great. I'm so glad that we're getting some responses in the chat. All these are so important. One big thing for me with nutrition that I didn't realize, because I'm from Phoenix, Arizona, and you never escape the sun there, is that I needed to start taking vitamin D when I got to Virginia because the sun does not come out enough for me. This is all great. Having family far away is difficult. I resonate with that and understand that. It's a new thing for me since moving to college only a few years ago, but I'm so grateful for technology and being able to try to mitigate that gap in whatever way I can. Yeah, Elizabeth.
Okay, I posted what I feel, everything pretty much. I keep it in my most on the list. The one that I have problem with is family. So because my family are so far away, and I mean I reach out over the phone, but then I'm trying to connect with many people that are in my same situation. So I feel the social connectivity is very important, to even a smile, say hello, good morning, outside. So I try to go for a walk. I do outreach. So that's when I do pretty much my social connection, even just a person that I don't know, I help or something, or go to the pond and feed the dogs. That's my favorite. But I think this is an excellent, whoever put this together. I congratulate. It's really, really fascinating. I just went over just like, it's very simple and it's just like, woo, thank you for sharing.
Thank you, of course. I'm gonna stop sharing this. Hopefully everyone has thought of theirs. That is the extent of the very short little workshop, but I'm hoping that the list of resources in hard times and then your preventative care can be at least a starting point for us all to both prevent and address the burnout that we experience in our lives. And I will toss it to Deborah for the Q&A for all of our panelists.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Marisa. That was a wonderful discussion, and it's always good to see Nick's model. I think every time I look at it in a different day, on a different day, I have different priorities. So that's been actually really nice to kind of think of this not as like you do this once and then you put it away, but rather it's an iterative process that changes over time, and that's okay. Changes week by week, minute by minute, who knows? So it's good that we have these tools in our toolbox now that we can kind of keep up with. So I would love to open it up if there are any questions for any of our panelists. We had Antti discussing how trauma impacts us and our work, Nick speaking about burnout, Hannah and self-care routines, and Marisa's resilience toolkit creation workshop. So lots of different items that we discussed. Any burning questions out there? Feel free to put your questions in the chat, or you can come off mute and ask away. While folks start thinking, I wanted to ask Antti. Antti said something that really resonated with me. Antti, when you were talking about sharing the work of one of your colleagues mentioned that it was nice to know that she's not the only one. How can we reach out in a way that doesn't trigger folks, in a way that can show support but not be necessarily overbearing to our colleagues in stressful moments?
What a difficult question, Deborah. I was visiting in DC. There's a meeting of the large tribes, Indian tribes, Native American tribes, and I was speaking with a tribal leader and a healer from northern Montana, whose tribe is specialized on working with horses. And he explained how horse sense and has the wisdom to understand what has happened to someone, that they're more gentle to someone who is carrying deep trauma, or just more warm or approaching. And you can just imagine this magnificent creature having that sensitivity. Why wouldn't we as human beings? I think there is this magic between us where we can connect and understand the other, sometimes without words. And so I don't think there's any rule to it. Just explore, use that beautiful magic that you have. And of course, it's a dialogue. You don't enforce yourself. You signal your willingness to be present and be available to the extent that the other person is ready to share. And even if not, at that moment, you are together in that moment, whether it's painful or joyful or just journeying together. So yeah, thank you, Deborah, but really hard question. Maybe you can continue yourself.
That's beautiful. No, I appreciate that. Thank you. I think that's a difficult line to walk. And it's a really nice image, connecting us with other beings and thinking about our global responsibility and sensitivity to each other. Any questions from the room? If not, my colleagues know that I find lots of things interesting, so I can keep going here. I put a smile on all their faces. That was okay. So I did have another question. This one was for Nick. Nick, when you were talking about folks in the caring profession, it was really helpful to get the definition of what caring professions are and who folks in the caring professions tend to be. Can you, either through your experience or through your robust knowledge of this topic, maybe talk about walking the line of putting ourselves in spaces where we know we tend to do, bad things for our mental health and well-being, put ourselves in spaces where we tend to burn out, but also have that fire and passion. When should folks in caring professions think about adding something else to their life or changing directions, or is that something that folks should be even thinking about?
Great question. It's so funny when you said think about doing something else, I got like goosebumps. I got chills. Because there's let me back up. One of the reasons I'm so interested in burnout prevention and resilience building in peace builders is one of my primary hypotheses is that if we can make the peace building field, and we can generalize that, I think, to caring professions, if we can make it more adaptive to the needs of practitioners, gentler, I don't know how else to say it, if we can make the spaces that we work in just gentler for the people who are doing the work, I think practitioners, one, will be able to stay in this space longer without incurring health damage and relational damage. And two, I think we'll be able to entice more people to go into caring professions, which is certainly not as, fiscally lucrative as going into tech or big consulting or whatever. So how do we toe the line? I don't have a formula. I think the line looks and feels different for every person. I am super invigorated by fieldwork. I love it. That's what I live for. Other folks do not want to be in the field. They are totally cool with cranking out grant applications, with running meetings, with whatever. So, what I find exciting, energizing, invigorating, another person would find stressful, depleting, whatever. Kind of, old school introversion, extroversion theory says the same thing, is how do you derive, energy in the world? Is it through relationships or through moments of solitude? So I think the line is different for every person. One of my personal line identifying kind of practices is looking at Nick Sherwood's irritability. Am I like when especially with the people that I'm super close to, friends and close family, or family and close friends, colleagues, you're always hopefully wearing a professional suit. Hi, thank you so much for the because you don't want to lose your job and you're playing a role, right? When I start getting irritable, especially with my little sister, and little siblings are annoying sometimes, like they are, but I can be annoying too. And so I notice when I'm starting to head towards burnout, when friends and family are calling me or I'm calling them or on the phone, and I find myself getting irritated about talking to them, literally just hanging out. I'm like, oh shoot, man, this isn't good. You gotta make some changes. So I think one of most solid practices is looking at how I treat the people that I love the most. Am I unintentionally or intentionally being a meanie poopy pants, or am I not? Right. Another big one, I'll end with this. The other big one is how I'm treating my body at any given time. How much wine am I having after a hard day at work? How many days out of a week of a rough work week am I having a glass of wine or 2 glasses or a bottle? Again, really good kind of behavioral indicator. So am I going to the gym? Am I eating right? If I'm not, well, one, that behavior is a cause of burnout. It is also a symptom of burnout. So we see how these things are reciprocally deterministic. But yeah, I would say how I'm taking care of my body and how I'm treating the folks that love me. That's how I know if I've overstepped the line. Great question. Great question.
Great answer. Thank you. Thanks for also sharing a bit about your personal experience. I think that's actually really, really helpful to hear for folks in similar boats. Great, we have some hands up. I want to turn to a question in the chat about connection. I think, I just moved here from, out of state. I think it can be hard, especially as students, to find and build connections. Marisa gave us a lot of tools in our toolkit for kind of thinking about those connections and what they mean to us. Hannah, I was wondering if you could maybe share a little bit about your experience with finding those connections. It sounds like you, and Marisa, you can also speak about this with water polo, learning fun facts every day. Oh, no, it was rugby, water rugby. Great. But you both are involved in these connection activities where you see other people, get out of your space, and get to form friendships and close connections with people around a topic or a subject that you are both passionate about, and you prioritize that in your lives. So Hannah, I'll turn to you if you can talk about what it was like finding that and any advice that you have.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah, and thank you for the question in the chat. I think this is something that we all struggle with at some point or another, moving to a new place, trying a new job, trying a new activity, and it can feel a little bit overwhelming as to how do we find the connections and find like-minded people. I know for me, I think coming to college is a bit of a unique experience, but in terms of finding new friends, I think trying different clubs and finding out what sticks is kind of my go-to. So I remember early on, went to a ton of first meetings, and you kind of pick up the energy of the room, see what kind of people are there. Is this something I'm really interested in, or was it just that their booth was really enticing and I thought it would be a good idea, but it's not my plan. And so for me, going to the Latin dance club, that was something I don't really dance in front of people. I wasn't sure how it was going to go, wanted to be in the back of the room, and found out that it's actually a really warm, welcoming group of people where I can be kind of silly and goofy, and it doesn't matter if I mess up the steps. We're all just there to decompress at the end of the long day. And I've met people from really interesting places, and through that, I've had kind of different levels of connection. I have the people I just see weekly at the class, and then I've made some friends out of that. So I think it's like learning like who you can connect with and on what capacity and what kind of connections sustain you. So maybe you aren't getting a deep connection out of that one experience, but maybe you will in another setting. So just having the courage to go out there, and even if it feels like you might be the only one going through that, you're certainly not. I'll throw to Marisa or any of the other panelists if they want to answer.
Yeah, I can answer a bit. I think with clubs and things, well, the fun thing about underwater rugby is that I wouldn't have known about it if I hadn't tried underwater hockey at George Mason. So that's another like club experience that you kind of throw yourself into. And Obviously, both of those sports are weird and no one really knows about them. So entering into that space means you're kind of already smiling and going in like, what is this? And everyone there knows that you don't know what it is. And they like, it's a big learning environment, which has also been great. Yeah, and just, I think I have, like in my self-care routine, have a difficulty staying consistent with those things that I have to travel to get to. So doing that consistency is also great for keeping up with those friendships, seeing those faces. And I think in the personal interaction tip, more of it is if you hear someone talking about something that you're even mildly interested in, like striking up that conversation, joining that conversation, seeing where it goes, and trying to build from there. I have a concert buddy that I met through underwater hockey, but like we go to concerts together now. And that has deepened that friendship outside of the club, and just looked for like intersecting hobbies with those you do other things with. And sometimes I'm surprised again about how small the world can be when you do things like that. Yeah, so I think that's my big takeaway from the clubs and groups I'm a part of.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. I really loved your point about consistency. I think that I wouldn't really have thought about that. And it's a really, really important point to really make sure you're dedicating the time. So thank you for sharing. Awesome. We have a question. Mariam, would you like to come off of mute and ask, or ask in the chat?
Yeah, I can talk. First of all, I just wanted to
Great.
thank each and every one of you who spoke today and for giving such an insightful way of dealing with / managing and taking preventative care for our mental health. My question is for Antti. While working in the field, there have been times where, I feel very like overcome with emotion, and I always try to make sure I'm not allowing, that emotion out until it's in an appropriate place. And I've noticed that a lot of this emotion is also mixed with guilt for even feeling that emotion when I'm working in an area for a short period of time, but then going home at the end of the day. Whereas, the people who I'm working with don't have that privilege. So my question is, how are we able to transform our, emotion or, perhaps even trauma into something positive, especially when in the field working with local communities who are facing severe devastation?
Mariam, that's a wonderful question, and thank you for your heart. Thank you how it feels, and for you to think about this. And I just want to acknowledge that somehow the aid system, because of its own rules, it's somehow an inhuman or a bit sick system. We think that we can go into place and pretend to be neutral, professional, not really being affected, and this and that. And I think we don't recognize often, if we don't maintain connection to our emotions, how broken the system is and how the system itself hurts people. However, the difficult part comes when you are in a service delivery responsibility. So you should not be making choices based on your emotion, but be based on the professional principles that are there. And I have to be very honest that I walked around this in a way that I did assist individuals on a private basis outside the system every time I was based somewhere. And partially it was just to stay human. And second was to take myself out of that expert role and recognize that we do need those relationships. And without that, there was always something that you can do. And I've continued to support some families, some individuals, even I left. It's always been very small, but extremely deeply meaningful. And I think through those connections, I could perhaps do something little that helped me to maintain that humanity and do something little for individuals, but also stay as a human being connected. I'm not sure if this made sense, but that's at least the way I struggled through those times.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Deborah. I was just also going to expand off of what Antti said, and I think, Miriam, you're raising such an important question, and I don't know that there's any one right answer to that. I think we're going to be thinking about that one for a long time after this call. I know, reflecting on fieldwork experiences for me, I think this is something where colleagues come in really important, and having colleagues that know you and can recognize when something's off, maybe even before you do. And also like preventing that like emotional tipping point. I know you mentioned like getting to like a safe space and an appropriate place where you can have that emotion. So recognizing like that is building, and then finding the space for that. I've found in the fieldwork context, like having colleagues recognize that for each other can be really helpful. And then making sure that there's not that like interruption of like whatever activity it is that you're involved with. And that way too, like, you can experience it and also like in appropriate ways share that you care so deeply with the folks that you're working with on the ground, like Antti was kind of saying, because that's showing your humanity. So I think just commenting, building on Antti's point, to speak about the importance of teams in this setting.
Thank you for the addition. Well, with probably more questions than answers, we end this session today. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you for your participation in Marisa's workshop and your questions. We really appreciate it. Feel free to reach out to any of these folks at the Mary Hoch Center for Reconciliation. We would love to discuss this more with you. This is what we are here for. So hopefully this is not the end, but the continuation of a great conversation. Enjoy your Peace Week.